The accidental discovery Captain HFY had been hauling cargo across the Andromeda trade routes for over 30 standard cycles, and in all that time, she had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with either percussive maintenance or a hefty bribe to the local port authority. The Vorthen captain prided herself on running a tight ship, even if that ship happened to be the somewhat dubious cargo vessel known as the Stellar Drift. The name was meant to be ironic, though most of her crew suspected it had become disturbingly accurate over the years. The crisis began, as most crises do, on what should have been a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning in the Kepler sector. HFY was reviewing manifest reports in her ready room when her chief engineer, a perpetually anxious Zellarian named Flux, burst through the door with all 4 of his eye stalks quivering in distress. "Captain, we have a situation," Flux announced, wringing his tentacle-like appendages in a way that made HFY's stomach drop. In the 3 years Flux had served aboard her ship, she had learned that his definition of situation ranged anywhere from mildly inconvenient to "we're all going to die horribly in the void of space." "Define situation," HFY said carefully, setting down her datapad and preparing herself for the worst. "The quantum resonance chamber has developed what I can only describe as a philosophical disagreement with the hyperdrive motivator," Flux explained, his translator device struggling with his rapid, panicked speech. "They're not talking to each other anymore, and without their cooperation, we're effectively dead in space." HFY blinked her large, dark eyes slowly. In 30 years of space travel, she had encountered broken engines, faulty life support systems, and even the occasional cosmic ray shower that turned the ship's computer temporarily poetic. But she had never heard of ship components having relationship problems. "Can you fix it?" she asked, though Flux's continued suggested she already knew the answer. "I've tried everything in the manual," Flux replied miserably. "I've recalibrated the quantum flux dampeners, realigned the motivational matrices, and even tried couples therapy between the components. Nothing works. They just keep ignoring each other." The situation was more dire than it appeared. The Stellar Drift was currently 3 days out from the nearest space station, carrying a cargo hold full of temperature-sensitive Arcturian silk that would lose 90% of its value if it wasn't delivered within the next 48 hours. More importantly, their life support systems were tied into the same network as the hyperdrive, meaning that if the ship's components continued their electronic sulking, everyone aboard would eventually run out of breathable air. It was then that HFY's communications officer, a young Kethron named Pip, chimed in from the bridge. "Captain, I'm receiving a distress beacon from a small transport vessel about 2 light minutes from our position. They're requesting assistance with engine troubles." Under normal circumstances, HFY would have been the first to offer help to fellow travelers in distress. However, given that her own ship was currently engaged in what could charitably be called a mechanical nervous breakdown, she wasn't sure how much assistance they could provide. "What kind of assistance are they requesting?" she asked. "They say they have an engineer aboard who specializes in quantum mechanical systems, and they're offering to trade repair services for passage to the Kepler station," Pip replied. HFY considered this. It was irregular, certainly, but desperate. Times called for desperate measures. What species? There was a pause before Pip responded, and when he did, his voice carried a note of confusion. "They say they're human, Captain. I had to look it up in the database. Apparently, they're from a planet called Earth, somewhere in the Outer Rim territories. The entry says they're a relatively new species to interstellar travel, only achieved faster-than-light capability about 50 standard years ago. Zexai had heard of humans, though only in passing. They were considered something of an oddity in galactic circles, known primarily for their strange habit of naming their spaceships after deceased family members and their inexplicable fondness for consuming heated plant extracts. The general consensus among most species was that humans were harmless enough, if a bit eccentric. "Are they certified?" she asked. "The engineer claims to have credentials from something called MIT, as well as experience with quantum systems," Pip replied. "Though I should mention, Captain, their ship appears to be held together with some kind of metallic adhesive tape." Any other day, Zexai might have politely declined and looked for more conventional help. But with her cargo deadline looming and her ship's components apparently in need of marriage counseling, she was willing to try anything. Bring them aboard, she decided. What's the worst that could happen? 20 minutes later, Zexai found herself face to face with her first human. Maya Chen was smaller than she had expected, standing barely up to Zex's shoulder, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing what appeared to be a jumpsuit covered in various tools and diagnostic equipment. What struck Zexai most was the human's eyes, which seemed to take in everything around them with a mixture of curiosity and quiet confidence. "Captain Zexai, I presume," Maya said, extending her hand in what Zexai's cultural database identified as a human greeting gesture. "I'm Maya Chen, Quantum Systems Engineer. I understand you're having some technical difficulties." Zexai cautiously extended her own hand, noting that the human's grip was firm but not aggressive. "That's putting it mildly. My chief engineer tells me our quantum resonance chamber and hyperdrive motivator have stopped communicating with each other." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "Ah, the classic silent treatment scenario. I've seen this before. Mind if I take a look?" What followed was perhaps the most unusual diagnostic procedure Zexai had ever witnessed. Instead of immediately connecting her instruments to the ship's systems, Maya simply sat down next to the quantum resonance chamber and began talking to it. "Hey there, beautiful," Maya said softly, patting the humming metal casing. "Having a rough day? I know the feeling. Sometimes we all need someone to listen to us." Flux, who had been watching this display with growing alarm, turned to Zexai. "Captain, I don't think the human understands how quantum mechanics work." But Maya was already moving onto the hyperdrive motivator, crouching down beside it and placing her ear against its housing. "And you must be the motivator. I bet you're frustrated too. It's hard when people don't appreciate all the work you do, isn't it?" "This is highly irregular," Flux muttered, but Zexai held up a hand to silence him. There was something about the human's approach that intrigued her, even if it defied all conventional wisdom about starship maintenance. Maya spent the next hour moving between the two systems, alternately listening, adjusting settings, and maintaining what could only be described as a running conversation with the machinery. She would occasionally mutter things like I see, and that makes perfect sense, as if the engines were actually responding to her. Finally, she stood up and dusted off her hands. "I think I know what the problem is," she announced. "Your quantum resonance chamber is running a harmonic frequency that's exactly 0.3 cycles off from what your hyperdrive motivator expects. It's like they're trying to sing the same song in different keys." Flux blinked all four eyes in rapid succession. "That's actually a fairly accurate analogy. But how did you determine the frequency differential without running a full spectral analysis?" Maya shrugged. The resonance chamber was humming in B-flat, but the motivator's vibration patterns suggested it was expecting be natural. It's just a matter of listening. Listening, Flux repeated slowly, as if the concept were completely foreign to him. Sure, machines have personalities, just like people. You just have to pay attention to what they're trying to tell you. Maya pulled out a small tool that looked like a cross between a screwdriver and a tuning fork. Mind if I make a small adjustment? 30 seconds later, the ship's engines came back online with a smooth, harmonious hum that hadn't been heard aboard the stellar drift in months. The quantum resonance chamber and hyperdrive motivator were once again working in perfect synchronization, and all of the ship's systems showed optimal performance ratings. Flux stared at his diagnostic readouts, in complete bewilderment. This is impossible. The repair should have taken at least 6 hours, and that's assuming we had the right replacement parts. Sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones, Maya said, packing up her tools. Your components weren't broken. They were just having a communication breakdown. All they needed was someone to help them find their harmony again. As word of Maya's miraculous repair spread throughout the ship, Zexai found herself looking at the human engineer with new respect. There was something different about the way humans approached problems, something that went beyond mere technical knowledge. They seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of how complex systems worked together, an ability to see connections that other species missed. The remaining journey to Kepler Station passed without incident, and when they docked, Zexai was surprised to find herself reluctant to see Maya go. The human had spent the voyage sharing stories about Earth and her experiences traveling among the stars, and Zexai had found herself genuinely enjoying their conversations. You know, Zexai said, as Maya prepared to disembark, if you're ever looking for more permanent employment, I could use someone with your skills aboard the stellar drift. Maya smiled, the expression transforming her face in a way that Zexai found oddly appealing. Thanks for the offer, Captain, but I've got my own ship to worry about. Although, ... She paused, considering. If you ever run into other captains who are having similar problems, feel free to give them my contact information. It seems like there might be a demand for this kind of work out here. And with that simple statement, Maya Chen unknowingly planted the seed that would eventually grow into one of the most significant developments in interstellar history. As the stellar drift departed Kepler Station with its cargo successfully delivered and its engines running smoother than they had in years, Captain Zexai couldn't stop thinking about the human engineer and her unusual approach to problem solving. She began mentioning Maya's techniques to other captains during her regular stops, sharing stories about the human who could make starship engines sing in harmony. At first, her tales were met with skepticism and amusement, but as more ships began experiencing similar communication breakdowns between their systems, word of Maya's success began to spread throughout the trade routes. Within 6 months, Maya Chun's name had become something of a legend among independent cargo haulers and transport captains. She was the human who could fix anything, who could make sense of the senseless, and who treated starship engines like old friends rather than mere machinery. The spreading revolution, the message reached Maya, Chun's personal communicator, while she was elbow-deep in the quantum matrix of a Tyrellian freighter, trying to convince its navigation computer to stop calculating hyperspace jumps in what appeared to be ancient poetry. The captain of the freighter, a 6-armed arachnoid named Skitter, had initially been skeptical about hiring a human engineer, but desperation had overcome prejudice when his ship began plotting courses to destinations that existed only in classical literature "Maya, you need to see this," called her assistant, Jake Rodriguez, from across the engine room. Jake had joined Maya's operation 3 months earlier, after word of her success had reached the Human Colonial Administration. He was a former military engineer who had grown tired of maintaining Earth defense, force vessels, and had jumped at the chance to work on alien technology. Maya carefully extracted herself from the quantum matrix, leaving the navigation computer, humming what sounded suspiciously like a Shakespearean sonnet, and walked over to where Jake was standing. On his portable display, she could see a priority message from Captain Zexai of the Stellar Drift. "Maya, I hope this message finds you well." Zexai's voice came through the communicator's speakers. "I've been recommending your services to other captains, and the response has been ... overwhelming. I've received over 200 inquiries in the past month from ships requesting human engineers. I think you may have started something bigger than either of us realized." Maya and Jake exchanged glances. In the 6 months since Maya had repaired the Stellar Drift, word of her unconventional methods had spread throughout the independent shipping networks. What had started as a simple trade of services for passage had evolved into a full-time business, with Maya and Jake traveling from ship to ship, solving problems that had stumped alien engineers for years. 200 requests, Jake said, whistling. "Low, Maya, we can't possibly handle that many jobs ourselves." "I know," Maya replied, her mind already working through the implications. "But maybe we don't have to handle them all personally." The solution came to her as she watched Skitter attempt to communicate with his navigation computer using what appeared to be interpretive dance. Each species in the galaxy had developed their own approach to technology, their own ways of thinking about complex systems, but they all shared the same fundamental problem. They treated their machines as tools rather than partners. Humans, Maya realized, had a unique perspective. Perhaps it was their relatively recent entry into interstellar travel, or their habit of anthropomorphizing everything from their cars to their coffee makers. But humans seemed naturally inclined to think of technology as personality and needs rather than mere mechanical functions. "Jake," she said suddenly, "how would you feel about teaching other people to do what we do?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "You mean training alien engineers in human problem-solving techniques?" "Exactly. Think about it. We can't be everywhere at once. But we could train other engineers to approach their systems the way we do. Teach them to listen to their machines, to think about technology as a relationship rather than just a tool." The idea was ambitious, perhaps even revolutionary. But as Maya explained her vision to Jake, she could see the excitement building in his eyes. They wouldn't just be fixing individual ships, they would be changing the entire way the galaxy thought about technology. Their first opportunity to test this theory came sooner than expected. 3 days later, they received an urgent distress call from orbital station Kepler-7, the massive commercial hub that served as a central trading post for the entire sector. The station's primary fusion reactor was experiencing cascade failures, and the station master, a distinguished Centaurian named Administrator Velith, was facing the possibility of evacuating over 50,000 inhabitants. "We've tried everything," Velith explained as Maya and Jake materialized on the station's transporter pad. "Our best engineers have been working round the clock for the past week, but the reactor keeps developing new problems faster than we can solve the old ones." Maya and Jake were escorted through the station's corridors toward the reactor complex, passing groups of worried-looking beings from dozens of different species. The atmosphere was tense, and Maya could hear the subtle vibrations through the station's hull that indicated the fusion reactor was indeed struggling to maintain stability. When they reached the reactor complex, Maya was surprised to find not just the station's chief engineer, but a small crowd of technical specialists from various ships that had been docked at the station when the crisis began. There were Zalarians, Kethrans, Vorthans, and several other species, all working frantically at diagnostic stations and arguing about the best course of action. The problem is cascade resonance feedback. The chief engineer, a tall, thin Altarian, named Technician Prime Zell, explained to Maya. Each time we solve one malfunction, it creates harmonic disturbances that trigger new problems elsewhere in the system. Maya nodded, studying the massive reactor through the observation windows. The fusion chamber was a work of art, a perfect sphere of crystalline material surrounded by countless monitoring devices and control systems. But even from a distance, she could sense the disharmony in its operation. "Has anyone tried talking to it?" she asked. The question brought all conversation to a halt. Dozens of alien eyes turned to stare at Maya, and she could practically feel the waves of confusion and skepticism radiating from the assembled engineers. "Talking to it," Technician Prime Zell repeated slowly. "It's a fusion reactor. It doesn't have cognitive functions." "Maybe not cognitive functions as you understand them," Maya said, "but it definitely has personality. Look at the way it's behaving. The cascade failures aren't random. They're following a pattern. It's trying to tell you something." Jake stepped forward, addressing the group of engineers. "What Maya is suggesting is that you change your perspective. Instead of thinking about the reactor as a machine that's broken, try thinking about it as a partner that's stressed and needs help." "This is highly irregular," muttered a Vorthan engineer. "Fusion reactors operate according to established physical principles, not emotions." "Physical principles? Yes," Maya agreed. "But those principles are incredibly complex. When you have thousands of interconnected systems all trying to work together, the relationships between those systems become just as important as the individual components." To demonstrate her point, Maya approached one of the diagnostic stations and began listening to the reactor's operational sounds. The fusion chamber hummed with a deep, thrumming resonance, but there were discordant notes mixed in, frequencies that clashed with the main harmonic pattern. "There," she said, pointing to a particular frequency spike on the audio display. "That's your problem. The magnetic confinement system is running about 2% faster than the plasma injection system expects. They're not synchronized." Technician Prime Zell checked his instruments. The magnetic confinement system is operating within normal parameters. Normal for individual operation, maybe, but not normal for cooperative operation, Jake explained. The plasma injection system has probably been gradually adjusting its timing to accommodate small variations in the magnetic field. But now it's reached the point where it can't compensate anymore. "So what do you suggest?" Administrator Vel asked. Maya smiled. "We teach your reactor to dance." What followed was the largest impromptu engineering lesson in galactic history. With the clock ticking toward a potential station evacuation, Maya and Jake worked with the assembled engineers to implement what they called the Chen Protocol, a systematic approach to treating complex technological systems as cooperative networks rather than collections of individual parts. They started by having each engineer focus on a different subsystem, but instead of just monitoring performance parameters, they were instructed to listen to their system's operational sounds and observe its behavioral patterns. Maya guided them through the process of identifying the personality of each component, understanding how it preferred to operate and what conditions made it perform best. The breakthrough came when a young Kethron engineer named Zix announced that her plasma circulation pump sounded lonely. Lonely? Technician Prime Zell asked skeptically. It's running at optimal efficiency, but its harmonic frequency doesn't match any of the other systems, Zix explained. It's like it's singing a solo when it should be part of a choir. Maya nodded encouragingly. Exactly. So how do you think we can help it feel more connected to the other systems? Working together, the mixed species engineering team began making subtle adjustments to the reactor's various systems, not to fix problems, but to create harmony between the components. They synchronized frequencies, adjusted timing patterns, and gradually brought all of the reactor's subsystems into a cooperative rhythm. The results were immediate and dramatic. The cascade failures stopped, the reactor's efficiency improved by 15%, and the entire station's power grid stabilized at levels that exceeded normal operational parameters. As the crisis passed and the immediate danger ended, Maya found herself surrounded by engineers from multiple species, all asking questions about the Chen protocol and wanting to learn more about human approaches to technology. This changes everything, Technician Prime Zell said, shaking his head in amazement. We've been thinking about complex systems all wrong. Not wrong, Maya corrected gently, just incompletely. You had all the technical knowledge you needed. You just needed a different way of thinking about how to apply it. Administrator Velith approached Maya and Jake as the crowd of engineers began to disperse. I would like to make you both an offer, he said formally. Kepler Station would be honored to host the first Human-Alien Engineering Cooperation Academy. We could provide facilities, resources, and access to students from across the galaxy. Maya looked at Jake, seeing her own excitement reflected in his expression. That's an incredible opportunity. But are you sure there would be enough interest? Velith gestured toward the groups of engineers who were still clustered around the reactor, studying the new harmonic patterns and discussing the implications of the Chen protocol. I think interest will not be a problem, he said with what Maya was learning to recognize as a Centaurian smile. Within 2 months, the Human-Alien Engineering Cooperation Academy had enrolled its first class of students. Engineers from 12 different species came to study human approaches to technology, learning to listen to their machines and think about complex systems as cooperative networks rather than hierarchical structures. The curriculum included courses with names like anthropomorphic system analysis, harmonic troubleshooting, and advanced machinery psychology. But beneath the somewhat whimsical course titles lay serious technical training that was revolutionizing the way the galaxy approached technology. Maya and Jake found themselves at the center of a growing movement that was changing not just how ships were repaired, but how they were designed and operated. The Chen protocol was being adapted for use on everything from personal spacecraft to massive industrial facilities, and reports of improved efficiency and reliability were coming in from across the known galaxy. But perhaps more importantly, the Academy was fostering unprecedented cooperation between species that had previously had little contact with each other. Human intuition, Zellarian analytical precision, Kethron pattern recognition, and Vorthan systematic thinking were combining to create new approaches to problem-solving that none of the species could have developed alone. As Maya stood in the Academy's main classroom, watching a human instructor work alongside a Centaurian professor to teach a mixed species class about quantum harmonics, she realized that what had started as a simple engine repair had evolved into something much larger and more significant. They weren't just teaching aliens to think like humans. They were creating an entirely new way for different species to work together, to combine their unique strengths and perspectives in pursuit of common goals. The Chen Protocol was becoming more than just a technical methodology. It was becoming a model for interstellar cooperation itself. And this, Maya suspected, was only the beginning.